My name is Jasmine Cobra. For a long time, I didn't really understand what it was that I had gone through, but I just always kept thinking back. I was like, wow, what they did was really messed up, and I literally can't do anything about it. While I was in it, you know, it really felt like there was no escape. The main reason why I started this project is for healing, because I just kind of want to forget about that portion of my life. But you know, it shaped a lot of who I am today, so there's not really a way for me to forget that. When you say the term abuse, it's such a strong word that a lot of people get put off by that, but I was like, that's kind of what drew me to it, because I was like, you know what, I recognize this is something that's needed to be talked about. I feel like, you know, not enough people are talking about this, and you know, not enough people recognize it for what it is. And you know, the moment that you do recognize it for what it is, then you have to deal with that. You know, you have to deal with what you went through. You have to deal with the trauma. You have to deal with how it affects your everyday life now. And not a lot of people can deal with that. I had a friend who was kind of like a friend of my sister's, and one day she just started talking to me about God, and I started praying with her, and I got saved that day, and then I started getting involved with her church. We actually, you know, love God and wanted to learn about God, and we weren't there to really mess around or to, you know, live a double standard. We were just kind of like, yes, I want to be in this, and I want to be a part of this, and give me everything that you can, you know. And I was so brand new to the things of God that I was just like soaking up everything that I could, and I was willing to do anything that I could to get a little better, and you know, to be a little bit better of a person. And so that eventually led into people pleasing. If I make this person happy, then God will be happy. You know, if this pleases the pastor, then it'll please God. And it was just that little bit of sun, like, you know, it'd be like 15 hard weeks of just nonstop grinding, and then they would say, you know, you did really well on this last video. And then that would be enough to keep me going for another 16 weeks until I got that again. A good portion of why that was so affected is because they wouldn't let you see your family. Like, if your family was not involved in the church, they were not going to let you see them, like, once you were living with them. And I lived in the discipleship home from 2013 up until the time I left, which was basically just a way to keep me isolated from them. And it was that isolation that worked so well to break down my identity and really form me and mold me into what they thought I should be. And so, you know, I had to ask permission to go see my sisters. I had to ask permission to go, you know, visit my mom and my niece and my nephew. Like, even if it was their birthday, if we had a church event, then it was like they would come second to that. And they would, like, you know, when I would ask them about that, be like, well, this is really important to me. They'd be like, well, we are your family. Like, we come first. God's priority is first. His priority is number one. I was like, well, then why does God allow us to have families if he doesn't want us to make that important into our lives?
Hey, boo-boo.
Oh, I love you, boo-boo.
I love you, boo-boo.
What are you doing?
Say hi. Hi, Snapchat.
Okay, hold on. Okay, hold her like that again. Put your shoulder around her. Yeah, and now look in the camera and both. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Happy Father's Day!
It made me feel like I couldn't do anything outside of their little circle of control, because then I would be seen as crazy by everybody else. They would make me seem crazy to everybody else. When I didn't listen to them, they treated me like I was rebellious. When I questioned things, they treated me like I was lazy when I told them no. They treated me like I wasn't committed when I said I have no way to get there. For example, the way I dress. Because they thought that you had to dress a certain way to impress people, but not to impress people, they would call it. They're like, well, you want people to see the change in your life, right? there was no way for people to notice the change in my life unless I did external things. And my hair had to be done all the time a certain way. It had to be curled, it had to be straightened, it had to be put up. And you know, I got so sick of it to the point where I just finally cut it off. Even with my short hair, they tried to control the way I, you know, presented myself. They're like, well, you're not feminine enough, you're not girly enough. You have to fit this certain mold and you can't really venture outside of that. It was always about you know, your image. Like, you could never be anything less than, you know, looking perfect or presenting yourself as perfect. And that didn't just go for like your physical demeanor or your physical look. You also, you know, weren't really allowed to express your emotions either. You weren't allowed to express negative emotion. You couldn't be angry about something. You had to go pray about that if you were. You weren't allowed to be tired. You know, if you were tired, you just weren't trying hard enough. And that was something that was really hard for me, considering, like, you know, that I had depression and I had a history of depression. A lot of it had to do with the way I was living, which again revolved around this church and this community. They had church like 5 nights a week or something ridiculous. Or if you weren't in service, then you were volunteering. And if you weren't volunteering, then you were, you know, hanging out with people outside of the church, like, that went to the same church as you. So you never got a moment alone, and you never got a moment to just slow down and to relax and enjoy the moment. And it caught up with me. I began to like lose my passion for things, and I started having anxiety attacks. Like, I literally felt like I couldn't breathe, and I didn't know what was going on, and you know, I didn't know how to deal with it. The reality of it is that I couldn't talk to anybody about this. They didn't really talk about mental illness. They kind of believed that, like, that was kind of something that was all in your head and it was made up, and you know, it was something that you could get over just by willing through it. You just need to, you know, go out there and tell more people about Jesus, because if you tell more people about Jesus, I guarantee you'll feel better. And it's like, yeah, that advice kind of worked, but at the same time I would go home and I would lie awake for hours just thinking about how pointless my life was and how, you know, pointless it was to keep on living. But I was like, I couldn't kill myself because, you know, if I did, then I didn't have faith in God. And you know, it's a funny thing to say that as a Christian and as someone who believes in God, and you know, who believes God can give your life meaning where there is none. Because I was like, well, it's my fault. It's my fault I have anxiety. It's my fault I have depression. It's my fault that I cannot get over this. So I wasn't sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night anyway, because I was on the media team, and you know, there would be often instances of where they needed a video the next day. Like, it had to be the next day because a pastor couldn't tell us the week before because they didn't think about it until just last night at midnight. So there would be a lot of times I'd be like, well, whatever, I'll just power through it. And eventually that caught up to me too, because there was one night I had gotten out of a class probably around, I think it was 9 o'clock at night, and then I had stayed until 10, which is when our college campus closes, to work on a project, because I was like, if I don't finish it here, I can't go home and expect to finish it because I'll be bombarded by all these other things. And one of my leaders that I was living with at the time, they text me and they're like, hey, we need you here to work on a video because we got to do this by tomorrow. And I was like, well, that's great. I mean, I thought I was getting sleep tonight, but I guess not. And so I started heading home. So I got back to close by my house. It was maybe like 3 or 4 blocks away. Got to a stoplight and it was red, and so I was waiting there for a minute, and then at some point I fell asleep. And I don't know how long it was for, but thankfully nothing happened. And I was like, wow. I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I went over to that person's house and we started working on the video, and They ended up sending me home early because they said I didn't look like I wanted to be there. And I was like, I just felt so relieved. I was like, this is not healthy. This is not good for me. I am going to literally die. I laid down and got 4 hours of sleep. And then the next day, one of my leaders that I had lived with came up to me and she was like, it looked like you didn't even want to be there. And so I told her, I was like, well, this is what happened. And I told her that I had fallen asleep. And basically she said, well, you just need to get over it. She's like, you need to be able to push past this and realize that this is what we do. At that point, I knew, I was like, I can't live like this anymore. I think the hardest thing was me just actually leaving. Because when I finally got the courage to leave, I basically moved out and left the church all on the same day. Like, you know, there was like church that night and they're like, hey, where are you? Like, we need you here. And I told my leader, I was like, I'm not coming tonight. I was like, in fact, I'm not coming back at all. And so she called me and we had a long conversation about it. And I feel like she really tried to understand. It was hard for me to say goodbye because I was like, you know, these people, they were like very dear to me. You know, I made some very real relationships there. One of the people that I lived with, when I went to go drop off my key, she wouldn't even acknowledge my presence. She acted like I wasn't there because, I mean, I guess she had felt so betrayed by what I did, but at the same time, it was like she wasn't able to understand that I couldn't live this lifestyle. Like, it felt so unreal to be free, and it felt so unreal to feel like, you know, you've been going crazy this entire time, but really it was just, you know, someone else that was making you go crazy. And now I was left with this emptiness almost. For whatever situation that you're in, don't feel like it's going to be easy once you leave. Yes, it feels amazing. And yes, it feels like the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. But at the same time, you are going to feel hurt. You are going to feel mad. You are going to feel empty, and you won't understand why, because you're like, these people are horrible to me. But at the same time, you remember all the good times you had. You remember those times that you traveled to a different state and, you know, stayed in a hotel and had a lot of fun. You remember those times that they celebrated your birthday. You remember those times that you spent together for 14 hours plus doing a project and, you know, you guys were able to laugh and to joke about it. But at the end of the day, it's like, is that all really worth your sanity? And this is something that you have to decide for yourself. No one can tell you, no one can try to convince you that it's not good for you. And honestly, I think if I had not left that place and if I had not found a different church, you know, and found people that I could really trust and open up to again, I honestly don't think I would have lasted very long. Because one day I woke up and decided, I was like, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. And I decided, I was like, I'm not going to let this run my life. I'm not going to let this control my life anymore. I am free to make my own decisions now, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Anyone who is still currently in an abusive situation, you know, I pray that you have the strength one day to leave. You know, this series is for you. This series is to show you that it doesn't have to be this way. Everyone watching this gets something out of it. If it at least gets you to think a little bit, that's all I ask. You're not alone. You know, you were never alone. You know, it's just that nobody liked to talk about it, but that's why we're doing this. That's why we're here now. And really, I'm just opening it up for anyone who wants to get involved. Please write me, DM me, email me, whatever you need to do. If you want your story heard, if you want your story featured, this is what we're gonna do.